Today I want to speak to you in this session about something very important. Please write this down because it is crucial for your understanding of life, society, and leadership. There are things you should never change. For the last 3 months, we've been talking about change, why it is necessary, why it is important. We've discussed how to adapt, how to grow, and how to evolve in a world that is constantly moving. Change is unavoidable. Change is everywhere. But today, I want to focus on the other side. Today, I want to tell you about the things that must remain permanent, things that you should never touch. I call them principles. Principles are meant to be permanent, unmovable, and non-negotiable. The problem with the world right now is that everyone is excited about change. Change is celebrated. People think that the faster they change, the better they become. But change, as powerful as it is, can also destroy if it is not guided by boundaries. Change is a predictable reality. It is one of the few things in life that cannot be escaped. Mountains change. Rivers change. Animals change. Trees change. You too are changing every second of your life. You are 5 minutes older than you were 5 minutes ago. Your body is evolving, your mind is developing, your life is moving forward. Change is inherent in creation. But here is the problem. We are the only creatures capable of deciding change. Animals live by instinct. They don't sit down to plan the future. I have never seen 20 sharks meeting together to decide what they will do next year. I have never seen a group of trees in a forest holding a congress to determine what the forest should look like in a decade. Only human beings have the gift of will. Only human beings can sit, think, plan, and regulate the future. That is a powerful gift, but also a dangerous one. The power of will allows you to determine your destiny. It allows you to take control of your life. It allows you to innovate, to create, and to influence the world. But it also allows you to decide against God, against principles, against eternal truth. That is why the power of will is the most dangerous gift God has given to man. God took a great risk when He gave us the ability to choose, but to make us in His own image, He had to grant us the power to make decisions. Think about this for a moment. Human beings can actually tell God, I will do it my way. That is the power of will. And because of that, the future of the world is in the hands of men and women who must learn to govern their choices wisely. Every time I hear about meetings of world leaders, G7, G8, G12, I get nervous. People are deciding the future of the world behind closed doors, without your input, without my input. And because of that, most of us are victims of other people's decisions. Have you ever wondered why Jesus instructed His disciples to pray a certain way? He said, pray like this: Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Notice carefully, He did not say, let human will be done. He said, thy will be done. He never trusted man's decisions. He never trusted councils, parliaments, or governments. He trusted eternal principles. And that is what I want you to understand today. Write this down. There are some things you should never allow to be changed. There are some principles that must remain permanent. And if you want to survive, prosper, and lead, you must understand these principles and respect them. Look at the world today. All nations are experiencing radical change, political confusion, constitutional revisions, social transformations, ideological experiments, moral uncertainty, religious conflicts, scientific and technological evolution, economic restructuring, you name it. We are living in an age where everything is being experimented with. Governments legislate without wisdom. Societies redefine morals and values. Cultures abandon traditions without understanding consequences. And all of this is what I call the danger of uncontrolled change. Change is inevitable, yes. Progress is necessary, yes. But not all change is improvement. Not all change brings advancement. Not all change produces development. That is why we must identify the difference between what is flexible and what is permanent. That is why we must establish boundaries. That is why we must know the things that should never ever be altered. Now that we have established that change is inevitable, but not all change is good, we must understand how to regulate change. The key is boundaries. Boundaries that must never be crossed. These boundaries exist in two forms: natural laws and spiritual law. Please write this down. This is extremely important. Change without boundaries is chaos. Uncontrolled change is dangerous, but change within principles is productive, constructive, and life-giving. Let's start with natural laws. Everything God created has its rules. Mountains erode over time. Rivers flow according to gravity. Animals age and die, and trees grow toward the sun. Each of these changes occurs according to a system designed by God. These are natural laws. If you violate these laws, disaster follows. Let me give you a simple example. A tree. God created the tree to grow in soil, to absorb water, to take sunlight, and to produce leaves and fruit. These are natural laws. Now imagine you take that tree and place it inside a sealed box, cutting off light, air, and water. You can pray, quote scripture, or speak words of faith over the tree. It will not survive. You have broken a natural law. No man-made intervention can override God's principles. No human decree can cancel the laws of nature. Write that down. Now consider spiritual laws. Just as physical creation operates under fixed rules, the spiritual realm operates under eternal principles established by God. Love, justice, integrity, and truth are not optional. They cannot be changed by human opinion, law, or culture. Attempting to alter spiritual principles leads to chaos, moral decay, and societal collapse. Governments may pass laws that defy justice or morality, but they cannot change the consequences. There is a limit to human authority. The ultimate law is God. This is why I tell you, before you implement change, you must first identify the original principle. Change is only safe when it aligns with natural and spiritual law. Ignore this and destruction follows. Consider nations that have ignored natural laws. Environmental disasters, economic collapse, and social chaos are often the result of violating these principles. Look at governments that decide to manipulate resources, change ecosystems, or redefine economic systems without understanding the original balance. The result: wasted resources, suffering, and instability. The same is true in our personal lives. You cannot change your life if you ignore the principles that govern health, relationships, finances, or spiritual growth. Principles are your true north, the reference point that keeps you aligned and secure. Any change that moves away from these principles is dangerous. Write this down carefully. Not all change is improvement. Not all change is advancement. Not all change is progress. You must always measure change against the original law, the original principle, the original reference. Otherwise, you are experimenting with chaos. Change without wisdom is reckless. Change without boundaries is destruction, but change guided by eternal principles is life-giving. It produces growth, stability, and advancement. It aligns you with God's will and ensures your actions have lasting value. As we continue, it is critical to understand what happens when change is implemented without reference to principles. Change, when unregulated, does not just fail, it can destroy. And today, my friends, the world is full of unregulated change. Everywhere you look, people are experimenting, testing, and redefining everything without checking the foundation. Let me give you a few examples. Political change. Governments rewrite constitutions, pass new laws, and redefine rights without understanding the long-term consequences. Sometimes these decisions are rushed, driven by emotions, power struggles, or ideology. The result: instability, confusion, and chaos. Social change. Traditions and social structures are overturned without evaluating natural or spiritual principles. Hierarchies, family systems, and societal norms are often altered in the name of progress. But what about wisdom? What about consequences? Economic change. Policies are created to boost development or modernize a nation, yet the original balance of resources and natural limits is ignored. Some nations invest in projects without understanding environmental or social laws, and millions of dollars and sometimes generations are wasted. Scientific and technological change. We innovate, create, and manipulate without fully understanding natural law. While progress is necessary, experiments without wisdom can harm ecosystems, disrupt communities, and produce irreversible consequences. This is why planning change is critical. Change is inevitable, yes, but you cannot respond haphazardly. You must first identify the original state, the original principle, the true north. Without this reference, every decision becomes guesswork. Write this down. Change is a deviation from a set reference. If you don't know the original state, you cannot change responsibly. You can move, but without reference, you are lost. Without true north, all movement is confusion. I want to remind you that humans are the only creatures capable of proactive change. Sharks don't meet to plan tomorrow. Trees don't hold councils. But we, created in the image of God, have the power to decide. And with that power comes responsibility. Every time nations meet in closed doors to decide the future, we must ask, are these changes guided by principles or just by opinion? Jesus taught us how to handle this power of will. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Not man's will, but God's will. Why? Because man's will is often disconnected from truth, justice, and principles. Man's will without guidance leads to chaos. So my friends, the danger of change is real. but so is the opportunity. Change can destroy or develop depending on whether it respects boundaries. Boundaries are created by God and are expressed in natural laws and spiritual laws. Change without boundaries is reckless. Change within boundaries is powerful. Write this down. The original reference, the original principle, the true north. These are the keys to safe and productive change. Without them, all progress is uncertain, all movement is dangerous, and all experiments risk disaster. Now that we have established the importance of true north and the dangers of unregulated change, let us examine some real-world examples where ignoring boundaries led to failure. Think about nature for a moment. A plant, a tree, or even a river follows laws that were established at creation. These are principles, natural laws that cannot be violated without consequence. If you take a plant out of sunlight, it dies. If you redirect a river without understanding the soil, the river floods or dries up. Human law cannot override these principles. No legislation, no prayer, no ritual can stop a tree from dying if its natural law is broken. This is exactly what happens in society. People make decisions for change without checking the foundation. Economic projects. Governments build artificial beaches, dams, or urban developments without respecting the natural environment. Millions of dollars are wasted and sometimes generations are affected. For example, when a government tried to construct a beach without studying tides and natural erosion, storms destroyed it in hours. Human planning ignored natural law, and nature reminded us who really governs. Social experiments. When societies redefine family structures, education systems, or cultural norms without considering long-term consequences, chaos often follows. You cannot force progress by ignoring the original state of things. Each principle, each law, each pattern exists for a reason. Legislative overreach. Governments often pass laws that violate natural or spiritual principles. They may attempt to control life, manipulate ecosystems, or redefine morality without understanding the eternal rules that govern outcomes. As a result, these societies experience instability, corruption, and confusion. Write this down. Not all change is improvement. Not all change is advancement. Not all change is progress. Not all change is development. These are critical truths that our generation seems to forget. So how do we change safely? How do we improve without destroying? There are 3 key steps. Identify the original state. Understand the starting point. Without knowing the true north, every decision is blind. You cannot fix what you do not first understand. Respect boundaries. Every natural law and spiritual law is a boundary. Ignoring them leads to disaster. Trees, rivers, humans, and nations all operate under these laws. If you break them, you face consequences. Plan proactively. Change must be deliberate, strategic, and guided by principles. We must be agents of change, not victims of random decisions. We cannot let emotions or trends dictate outcomes. Planning allows us to navigate inevitable change safely. Remember, friends, uncontrolled change is the enemy of progress. Controlled change is the pathway to development. The world today is full of people trying to change everything, but they are ignoring the rules, the boundaries, and the principles. That is why many nations are confused, disoriented, and unstable. In the next part, we will explore how to measure safe change, understanding which changes honor natural and spiritual laws and which ones violate them. This is where wisdom becomes indispensable, because the line between progress and disaster is very thin. As we continue, I want you to understand something critical. Change is inevitable, but the results of change are not guaranteed. Every decision you make, every action you take to improve or transform must align with principles that were established from the beginning. These principles are not negotiable. They are the foundation of life itself. Let's define this carefully. Principles are permanent truths. Unlike trends, emotions, or popular opinions, principles do not bend, they do not break, and they do not change. They exist whether we acknowledge them or not. Nature obeys principles, and human society cannot survive long-term if it ignores them. Examples of principles in everyday life. Natural principle. Trees grow best in soil and sunlight. Take either away, and growth stops. Water flows downhill, not uphill. Try to reverse it artificially and you create floods, erosion, or disaster. Spiritual principles. Honesty produces trust, deceit produces chaos. Compassion builds community, selfishness destroys it. Obedience to God's laws produces life, disobedience produces destruction. You see, friends, these are non-negotiable rules of existence. You can try to override them with human ingenuity, laws, or clever plans, but nature and the spiritual realm will correct you. The consequences of ignoring these rules are always severe. The danger of ignoring boundaries. In every country today, we see leaders and citizens pushing for radical change without understanding the boundaries. Governments pass new laws without studying history or natural law. Social movements redefine relationships without considering consequences. Economic reforms are implemented without understanding the environment or long-term effects. The result: confusion, instability, and failure. Millions suffer because people acted first and thought later. How to apply change correctly? Here's the key. Change must always begin with knowledge of the original state. You cannot improve what you do not understand. That is why I emphasize the idea of true north, your reference point, your original standard, your foundation. Without it, every attempt at change becomes guesswork. Once you identify the original state, you must respect the boundaries. This is critical. Boundaries exist in nature, society, and the spiritual realm. If you cross them, you face consequences. Follow principles. Principles act as guideposts. Any change that violates them will ultimately fail. Plan deliberately. Change is not chaos, it is strategy. Every step must be calculated to honor principles and achieve sustainable results. The role of human will. Remember, God gave humans the power of will, the ability to make choices and shape the future. This is a gift, but also a tremendous responsibility. The will allows us to direct change, but it can also be abused. Acting without knowledge of true north or principles is a misuse of will. You can create disaster in a moment, but it may take generations to correct. Write this down. The most dangerous change is unregulated change guided only by human will. That is the source of most societal failures today. The call to action. So what do? How do we ensure change becomes a force for development instead of destruction? Understand the original reference. Know where you are starting. This is your true north. Respect natural and spiritual laws. These are the boundaries within which safe change occurs. Plan and act deliberately. Use your will to regulate and direct change, not to gamble with the future. Change is powerful. It can develop or destroy. It can lift nations or destroy them. It is a neutral force. Its outcome depends entirely on whether it is guided by principle and wisdom. Political change. Governments revise constitutions, laws, and policies without studying historical consequences. Leaders often act on emotion, popularity, or expediency, ignoring the natural and spiritual principles that govern justice and order. Social change. Traditions and cultural norms are discarded too quickly without understanding their role in maintaining balance. Societies experiment with new family structures, gender roles, and social systems without fully understanding the long-term impact. Economic and technological change. Policies aimed at rapid development sometimes violate environmental laws, natural laws, or sustainable principles. New technologies are adopted without ethical frameworks, leading to unforeseen consequences. Every example shows that change without principle is experimentation, and experimentation often leads to failure, suffering, and confusion. Personal change. On an individual level, the same rules apply. You may want to improve your career, relationships, or finances, but if you ignore the boundaries and principles, your efforts can fail, no matter how hard you try. Career. Moving too quickly from one job to another without building experience or skills can harm long-term growth. Relationships. Changing partners or roles without understanding commitment, trust, and respect will create instability. Spiritual life. Adopting religious practices or beliefs without grounding in truth can lead to confusion and frustration. Write this down. The law of change is universal. It applies to nations, communities, and individuals. True north as a guide. To navigate change correctly, we must always locate true north, the original reference point, the principle, the law that governs the area you are changing. Think of true north as your compass. Without it, you can implement policies that destroy the environment. You can make personal decisions that harm your health, relationships, or future. You can lead a nation or community into chaos and confusion. True north protects you. It ensures that change leads to development, progress, and life rather than destruction. Examples from history. Consider history's greatest leaders and reformers. Martin Luther King Jr. stood on principle even in jail. His actions changed a nation because they were guided by eternal principles of justice and equality. Mahatma Gandhi refused to compromise even when imprisoned. His change was powerful because it followed the unchanging principle of truth and non-violence. Nelson Mandela held firm to principles of justice and reconciliation. His commitment guided the transformation of an entire nation. What these examples show us is clear. Change guided by principles is unstoppable. Change without principles is weak, confused, and ultimately destructive. Key takeaways. Identify the original state or principle before you attempt change. Respect natural and spiritual boundaries. Use deliberate planning to regulate and guide the change. Avoid acting solely on emotions, trends, or popularity. Be proactive, not reactive, in shaping your future and the future of your community or nation. Friends, the choice is simple but critical. You can be a victim of change or an agent of change. The difference lies entirely in whether you understand principles, respect boundaries, and follow true north. Elections, policies, and social reforms can be overturned before they even take root. Moral and social collapse. When change violates natural and spiritual principles, it often leads to the erosion of values. Ethical standards become fluid and the society loses its moral compass. Communities drift from order, leaving space for chaos and corruption. Economic and environmental damage. Development without adherence to natural laws destroys ecosystems, depletes resources, and causes financial losses. Technological advancement without ethical consideration creates societal and environmental problems. Write this down. Unregulated change is the fastest path to disaster. Change without reference points produces loss, confusion, and long-term harm. True north and leadership. In every area of life, leaders must recognize true north, the unchanging principles that guide proper decision-making. Without this compass, nations collapse under poor leadership. Businesses fail despite advanced technology or funding. Individuals make choices that lead to regret, failure, and broken relationships. True north acts as a stabilizing anchor. It allows change to occur in a safe and productive way. Even when storms of experimentation and chaos rage around you, adhering to true north ensures survival and growth. Historical lessons. History provides countless examples of unregulated change, leading to catastrophe. Entire empires have fallen because rulers ignored principles of justice, economics, or human nature. Societies have collapsed when experiments in morality or governance ignored natural or spiritual boundaries. Personal lives are destroyed when individuals chase change without understanding the rules or consequences. But history also teaches that change aligned with true north creates enduring success. Societies that respect natural laws and ethical principles endure. Individuals who align their actions with eternal truths prosper, even in turbulent times. The role of the kingdom perspective. From a biblical perspective, true north is God's law and principles. Change that aligns with these principles brings life and prosperity. Change that ignores them brings chaos and death. In Genesis, every creation follows a principle. The seed grows only in soil, water nourishes life, sunlight produces food. In nations, disregarding divine principles leads to social collapse. In personal lives, ignoring God's design results in frustration, confusion, and loss. Write this down. All effective change must honor the principles that govern life. Conclusion: two paths of change. Every person and society faces a choice. Victim of change. Those who allow others or trends to dictate their lives without reference to principles, they are swept away by every wave of experimentation. Agent of change. Those who understand principles, respect boundaries, and proactively guide change toward desired outcomes. The difference lies entirely in awareness and discipline. To be an agent of change, you must study the natural and spiritual laws, find true north, and never compromise your understanding of the original principles. We have reached the final part of this series, and now it is time to bring everything together. Change is inevitable, but the outcomes of change depend entirely on whether it is guided by principles and boundaries. The foundation of all change. Remember this: all change must be anchored in the original reference point, true north. Without it, progress becomes guesswork, experimentation, and often destruction. Original reference. This is the state, law, or principle that cannot be violated. It exists as a guidepost for all transformations. Boundaries. These are natural and spiritual laws. They define what is safe, possible, and sustainable. True north. Your compass in every decision. It keeps you from creating your own rules based on whim or personal desire. Write this down. Change without principle is chaos. Principle without change is stagnation. The balance between the two creates sustainable growth. How to be an agent of change. To become proactive rather than reactive, every leader, citizen, or individual must adopt 3 practices. Understand the original state. Know where things are, what they were designed to be, and why they exist. Study history, science, and natural laws to see patterns of stability and failure. Respect the boundaries. Natural and spiritual laws are non-negotiable. Ignoring them brings consequences. Align innovation, reform, and experimentation with these boundaries to ensure results. Act proactively with discipline. Make informed choices rather than reacting impulsively to trends or emotions. Plan your actions, anticipate outcomes, and execute in alignment with principles. Teach and influence others to respect the same laws, creating collective progress. Lessons from leaders who respected principles. History is full of examples of those who changed the world while remaining anchored in principle. Martin Luther King Jr. stood for justice, non-violence, and equality. He never compromised on the core truth of his mission. Nelson Mandela endured decades of imprisonment because he respected the principles of freedom and human dignity. Mahatma Gandhi led a nation to independence through non-violent civil disobedience, grounded in moral law. In every case, their change was guided by unmovable truths. They knew their true north and acted decisively. Principles as the key to sustainable change. Principles are permanent guides. They cannot be overridden by legislation, trends, or personal whims. True progress comes from changing the world without violating these core laws. In nature, plants, animals, and ecosystems thrive when laws of creation are respected. In society, nations prosper when governance, morality, and economics align with eternal truths. In personal life, individuals flourish when they align their choices with spiritual and natural principles. Write this down. The power of change is a gift, but wisdom is required to wield it correctly. The call to action. You have now learned change is inevitable and necessary. Not all change is improvement. Boundaries and principles are non-negotiable. True north guides every safe and sustainable transformation. You can be either a victim of change or an agent of change. The choice is yours. Will you follow the crowd and drift with every experiment, or will you study the laws, find your true north, and lead change with wisdom? The world is waiting for those who will stand firm on principle while shaping the future. You have the gift of will and the responsibility to use it wisely. Remember, stand for what is true. Align every change with principles. Be proactive, not reactive. Teach others the difference between temporary trends and eternal truths. This is the mark of a true agent of change. This is the path to progress that honors creation, respects natural and spiritual laws, and leaves a legacy that endures. Write this down. Change wisely. Change with principle. Change with purpose. And the results will be eternal.